molten core, the assumption of gravity in terms of creating fusion is assumed to be the tremendous power that is required to hold the planets in place in orbit and around the sun. That the expectation that gravity here on Earth gives us, the molten core we do know exists, is what they base that theory on. But since they do not know what gravity is, they cannot know what gravity does, apart from a large body attracts a smaller body in some sense of fact. The alternate view asks the question, if the attraction of gravity is so massive as to hold planets in orbit around the sun, how can we mere people move or jump or survive at all here on Earth? Surely the gravitational pull, even upon our bodies, when they are so tiny compared to the Earth, that right here on Earth are present evidence of the power that gravity has. We can run and jump. How is it that gravity, the same thing, holds planets together? It ain't so. Compared to being a human being, let's see, planets are millions of miles away. The math itself, when you take a look at what it means to be human and the size of the Earth to us, and you start adding that up, the math just simply isn't there. It's just a lie. The alternate view of that is some type of magnetic force is involved in holding the planets to the sun in an orbit. We can duplicate magnetic forces here on Earth and know that it's far more powerful than gravity itself. As to the viability of a molten core created by gravity, unless you can prove fusion is the actual result of that, on planets such as Jupiter, which are believed to have much greater gravity than here, there are no volcanoes. In other words, the theory holds no substance. It's simply a guess. They do not know. Willing to bet the planet on that theory? So let's review theory 3. How massive is the sun? The relationship we share with the sun is that heat causes expansion to exist. We know that is true by looking at a candle flame. Simple as that. People have been looking at that for thousands of years. We see that the expansion of heat multiplies the area of the actual fuel being burned at the wick by several times. The wick sucks the fuel up, raising it up, allowing for oxygen to go underneath, or the flame you see is many times greater than the wick from which it comes. This process also arises from the surface of the candle because it is the path of least resistance, and the heat expansion must occupy space. That's important because energy and time, as heat is energy and time occupying space, these things are considered to be the same. Consequently, know the flame rises due to heat expansion millions of miles from the surface of the sun. We know that, and we can expect that, but because it is a sphere on fire, in other words, flame goes all the way around the sphere, it requires the expansion due to that heat of all that flame in the same spot, makes it multiply further out. Think about that for just a minute. Thereby the heat pushes against itself, adding a tremendous increase in the distances needed away from the sun. We know this effect. The effect of this spherical push outward due to the heat expansion will create suction, actually off the sun itself, if the sun is not on fire at the center, and we'll get to that. Not pressure at the surface, and it is that suction that becomes the wick which drives the continued fusion of the sun. We know that the flames, millions of degrees in temperature, must make room for themselves. We know that. Therefore, we know the wick or sun body is separated from the flame, as is the candle to its flame. That means by the math, the sun is much smaller than the experts perceive it to be. Are you willing to bet the planet your experts are right? We reviewed the theory number 2, that all fusion fire begins and is sustained from the center of the sun. Thereby the entire sun is a ball of fire. The truth is, this is already proven false by a number of simple tests. If the sun was entirely on fire, from all of the mass on fire from the center outward, then it would all be burning, causing a rate of consumption of the sun, of the mass within the sun. That would be very extreme. If everything is on fire, everything is burning, everything is being consumed. That would mean that over thousands of years you'd see a drop in the diameter of the sun, and there would be a difference in the temperatures that would exist from the sun burning from thousands of years to now. We have history of thousands of years, and we know that the sun temperature was basically the same as it is today. That means the sun burns slowly, or the mass inside of it burns slowly, as is consistent with the idea that flames are very far away from the actual body of the sun, and being the material that is burned is being sucked up off the surface. Let's see. More critical is another truth. An exploding sun expands tremendously prior to its explosion. We know that. That's what they say. That's their description. We know if the sun were completely nothing but fire, being hottest at its very center and then radiating out, then the mass would all be inside that sun mass, would all be as hot as it can get. In other words, it cannot expand further. Because it does expand further, we know that something has to be heated up. And if we know that something has to be heated up, we know only the very center of that ball of fire could be cooler than the outside. That means that it has to, because it expands, we know something is expanding inside. If something is expanding inside, it's getting hotter inside. In other words, it cannot be the hottest point at the center, radiating outward to the coolest point. It is the hottest point at the very outside tip, and it is the coolest at the very center, or the opposite of what they believe. So, we further know, as is seen in the fire here on Earth, that a very large mass of fire, if it was on fire from the inside, from the center outward, has a variety of hot spots and will contain cracks and crevices and flumes varied by the temperatures beneath, as variations in structures on fire just do that. The temperatures beneath, the sun has cycles, but it's a different thing. Anyway, you're willing to bet the planet that the sun is on fire, that fusion is on fire from the center of the sun? Are you really? Think about it. The number one theory that fusion cannot be sustained here without extreme pressure. You got to remember, there's no going back if they're wrong. This planet is on fire if they're wrong. The alternative view to that is that the sun is not on fire from the center, working its way out, which is then must also be considered entirely on fire. Let's see, must then also be entirely on fire. What? Then it has to start a fire on the, then it had to start a fire on the surface. In other words, the fire on the sun, which is fusion, did not start at the center and work its way outward. Then it's a fire that started on the surface of the sun and worked its way around the sun. Or in other words, it doesn't take great pressures necessarily. In other words, if we start a fire on this planet, it can work its way around the sphere too, right here, right now. That propagated around on the sun, that propagated around the body of the sun because an atomic fire burning atomic bonds can exist on a surface and made entirely out of fuel. As is the sun, everything here is fuel. Everything is atomic structure. As is true of a chemical fire, when the necessary participants exist, the fire will spread and not be put out. Can you put out a forest fire? Not so easy. This is, instead of a few thousand degrees, this is a few million degrees. So in terms of national ignition facility, if they successfully enclose the atomic target environment with their lasers, then only one of four scenarios can exist. The materials are simply incinerated in their target. The atomic environment finds a way to escape, creating a focused explosion of nuclear proportions. They create fusion, and I'm not going to get more involved into that, really. Or the extremely reactive mass within the last physical property is that they can turn energy inside out by directing, because energy is action and reaction. If that action cannot continue outward, then it must turn back inward. In other words, if the lasers hold the energy into its environment, its own environment, then the energy has to turn around and focus on going backwards. If it does that, it becomes a black hole. A black hole is a little more complicated, but the energy runs into the center, and then it is able to be focused through the center into a very tiny laser line out, so to speak. And anyway, that's where dark energy comes from. That it is the turning of energy inside out. All right, the one last thing, they believe that hydrogen is the joining of two bonds of hydrogen into helium. It's not. Fires consume things, they don't put things together. Well, that's a little bit more complicated than that. But anyway, if we were going to burn atomic bonds, the debris field of an atomic bomb, of burning atomic bombs, would be the most primitive elements involved. In other words, one proton would be left and one electron would be left, let's say, without the bond between them. As they are ejected from the sun, that proton and that electron can be rejoined as hydrogen. That's what creates hydrogen. It isn't that the sun is made of hydrogen or any such thing. It's that it's taken apart and put back together again. Think about it.